Think you have what it takes to lead a band of grubby peasants to greatness? Can you stave off famine and fend off unruly bandits? Take your people from the brink of survival to a state of prosperity. That's the backdrop for Manor Lords. The game is comfortable and familiar, but in its own way, revolutionary. I'm one of the lucky few who got a chance to dive into the game early, and the time has finally come where I'm able to speak my mind on it. And boy, I've got a lot to say. Does it live up to the hype? Is it worth your time and money? Buckle in, because today we're talking all things Manor Lords. First and foremost, huge props to the publisher Hooded Horse for sending me over a key. You're the best. Manor Lords is a town building / strategy game with a focus on organic settlements and realistic battles. It's developed by Slavic Magic, and it's racked up an insane amount of attention on Steam, for very good reason. Turns out this is a lot of people's dream game. My last video focused on giving an overview, and there's a link on screen if you want to check that out. But now's the time to really dig in and comb through the nitty-gritty. Shine a light on the game's achievements, but also take note of its weak spots. Now, if you're sitting here thinking you're going to have to wade through 20 minutes or so of me waffling before you learn where on the fence I'm sitting, I'll just cut to the chase. Manor Lords is fantastic, really. It's a very special game. It's an amalgam of beloved games, and it is deeply satisfying to play. It's the love child of Banished and Stronghold, but the resulting offspring is a gorgeous Adonis. Like, seriously, a real looker. My gut feeling is hard to put into words. It somehow feels nostalgic. The titles that got me into the genre, I'd play them as a starry-eyed kid and I'd be shocked at just what the games could do. I had that same sense of wonder playing this, that same surprise that had me telling myself, holy crap, this is cool. Now that's pretty abstract, I get it. I can't really base a review off of gut feelings, which is why I won't. I'm going to look at the systems, pick them apart, and see what really works for this game. Why do they incite those feelings? You might think this is the build-up for me to sing absolute praises and say this is the perfect game. No, I don't think that. It's got problems and blind spots, and I will talk about those too. And then there's the obvious point about early access. This isn't a finished game. There's some stuff missing, text strings, spelling errors, various works in progress. I'm not going to be critical on that whole side because it's part and parcel with the state of the game. There are rough edges and imperfections, but keep in mind this is the weakest the game is ever going to be. Saying that though, let's start with a part of the game that has no right being so good at day one of early access launch: the visuals and sound design. I'm just gonna objectively state this. The game looks amazing. I'm willing to hear counterpoints to this in the comments, but this to me is the best looking strategy game on the market, bar none. When you're up close, you've got a front row seat to watch your townsfolk go about their daily lives. You'll hear the clatter of work and murmuring of gossips and anecdotes undercutting an incredible soundtrack. I can tell you straight up, your eyes and ears are in for a treat. The Lord view is something I find really fun, but not a selling point by any means. Just a that's cool they added that feature. Even more impressive than the graphics is the attention to detail. This feels like a labor of love. There's countless delicate touches that elevate the game. Take the market stalls. Each has their own goods, arrangement and clutter. You can have two families peddling the same wares, but their stalls will look slightly different. Same goes for the houses. Different plots will have different layouts, variations in the gardens and alternate woodwork. What struck me was that it wasn't just a bit of flashiness that wears off. I kept getting surprised, whether it's the snow in winter gradually crawling across the land, or the effects on my town during a storm. Puddles would form when it rains, and in those puddles you'll see the reflections of buildings and passers-by. The flash of lightning casts punchy shadows of your buildings on the ground. Roof tiles would get a reflective sheen, and the cloth of your market stalls looks damp and sodden and heavy. Now, I'd sing praises for this kind of thing in any studio, but for a one-man project, now that is one hell of a flex. Just insanely impressive. If you're looking for atmosphere, this has it in spades. A small touch which I loved happens when you turn off the UI. The game engages this alternate camera control which is lovely and smooth and cinematic. It makes just sitting and watching feel incredibly worthwhile. So the visuals and sound design, sure, top notch. But it is a strategy game. It can't all be style with no substance. Usually when I try and tell someone excitedly about building mechanics in games, they just walk away. But I know you're here for that, so let's talk about Manor Lords' unique building mechanics. The game is gridless. For me, that's exciting, but for some, that may fall on deaf ears. See, most town builders have a built-in grid. Roads must be straight. Buildings snap and must face a certain way. Everything is very 90 degreesy. Now, this is great if you want to build something space efficient or industrious, but not so much if you want something that feels organic or natural. One trouble with gridless systems like Manor Lords is that it can leave you with awkward gaps, and you'd usually plug those with decorations or trees. But if you're a terrible landscaper like me, it always ends up not looking quite right. But Manor Lords fixes this. See, you don't just build houses, you allocate land. You can fill in a troublesome trapezoid with burgage plots and your townsfolk will construct their houses there. Area too small for a house? Designate that to be a little market space and people will come and set up stalls there. I am all about the burgage plot system. It is incredibly flexible, not just in the way they take up the space, but in the usage of said space. You can pack a lot of houses together to maximize population density, the old Victorian London approach, or you can place fewer houses in a plot, giving people more room to build a backyard and add home extensions. The other radical change that comes with the burgage plot system is tied to upgrading them. A learned peasant is an ambitious peasant, and once they've climbed up the social ladder, they can adopt a trade. They can open a bakery in their backyard or start making arms and armor out of their home. This is really interesting game design. Usually you'd have a tab of buildings tied to goods and industry and you'd build up a district somewhere. But here it's integrated within the residential space. It blurs the lines and makes you lay things out differently. You can't take your normal approach when planning out a town. You just have to think, what makes sense in this situation? Now sure, there is probably a most efficient way to build things, and it's probably a grid, but because it's so satisfying to make these irregular little plots joined by sweeping roads, you don't build to be efficient. Instead you create something that just feels good, and then you sit back and look at your little hodgepodge come together. It's so rewarding. The same goes for farmland. You aren't just plonking down perfect squares to maximize space, you're gearing your fields around different fertilities to create an irregular patchwork, and the result is something picturesque and realistic. So you've built a few housing plots, some workplaces, and now time to sit back and watch your people toil away like good little worker ants, right? Well, not really. People don't just fill jobs in Manor Lords. If you don't issue orders, your people will just sit around all day doing nothing. Oh, typical lazy serfs. To get the ball rolling, you need to assign people a job. Let's say you make a villager a woodcutter. That doesn't just give you firewood for your people. See, you aren't just filling the gaps, you're assigning a profession to an entire family. So dad will go chop logs all day, while his son ferries them to the storeroom. He'll take some over to the market where his mum is peddling the best firewood in town to her neighbours. There's an internal economy that isn't just numbers going up and down, but supply, demand and distribution. It's all very clever and adds a sense of realism. Everyone has a purpose and things don't just magically happen. I do like this system, though sometimes it does lead to issues. Let's take my woodcutter scenario. You've got 3 links in the chain: the chopper, the deliverer, and the seller. If your townsfolk aren't getting the firewood they need, it can be hard to tell which link in the chain is not functioning. Often you'll click on workplaces and it just shows everyone is waiting, but never what they're waiting for. Godot, maybe. Now, I don't think the system is broken. The automation and split responsibilities are interesting. I think the issue is with information. If something isn't done, just a simple indicator of why would make fixing problems a lot less about blind trial and error. Another issue is the complete opposite. It's if things are actually working, but it doesn't seem like they are because stocks remain at 0. In reality, the resources are being produced, they're just being distributed straight away. In cases like this, one thing would fix it: report screens and graphs. 2 things would fix it. Yes, I know most medieval folk couldn't read, but I can, and I love a good supply and demand line graph. If the player is able to identify the issues in their town and also keep tabs on resource flow over long periods, that should make the production side of things feel more transparent and manageable. Trying to fix things blind does lead to areas of stagnation and some frustrations, but as a whole, the development and progression curve of Manor Lords felt solid. You've got simple goals to grow your town. When you hit a milestone, you get a development point to specialize your budding settlement. These aren't just X% increases on fringe cases, these bonuses can really open up new ways to play. If fertile land is scarce, you can funnel your efforts into your hunters and lean into a venison-based diet. You can unlock new buildings or artisan types. The ones currently there are impactful, and there's several more in development. I'm expecting the highest tiers to be real game changers that either have sweeping effects or even enable a niche town plan, which is something exciting to speculate on. There's also policy slots. These are settlement-wide edicts and laws. There's only 2, so currently the system isn't doing much right now, but I get the feeling it's included simply to give an idea of what's to come, and that is more ways to specialize and fine-tune your towns. I will say though, that a few of the development perks are way overtuned. One that removes tariffs on imported goods sounded like a healthy boost on paper, but in reality it completely broke my economy and generated infinite wealth. I couldn't spend the money fast enough. It was a real problem. God, I wish I could empathize with that in real life. All in all, I thought the game's economy was well structured. Well, that is before I broke it. Basically, there are 2 metrics. Regional wealth, which is the abstract wealth of your townspeople, and your treasury, which is your private stash. They each have their own uses, and you can't just nick their money and do your own thing with it. Well, unless it's through taxes, that is. Trading is an important part of the game. Each region has its strengths and weaknesses, and in some places it's going to be nigh on impossible to provide everything for your people. So, they either go without, or you get the goods elsewhere. You'll get cheaper imports if another region is producing a lot of the goods you need, though this is, as far as I could tell, the only interaction between different towns. Now don't get me wrong, I think it's really cool that you can settle in another area and build a new settlement. Your development points are not shared, so each space can be specialized, though the effort that goes into getting a town up and running to the point where it can reliably export goods takes a lot longer than just getting a perk in the trading tree. And both routes give the same result. Saying that though, it does look like this is just the framework system for the dev to build on. When you settle a region, there are 4 types of town to choose from, but only the baseline version is selectable, giving these frontier villages a bit more purpose, as well as either being able to spread the wealth or funnel it back to one big super town, will make the system a lot more engaging. For me, the purpose was to generate influence, the resource required for settling new regions. I was basically going through the first few milestones to get the gains, and then if the townsfolk starved and died after that, I wasn't too bothered. Influence as a system is a slow burn. Early on, you have a reliable source from bandit camps, but in the final stages of a game, those have all dried up. You have the means to close out the scenario, but you're just waiting for that influence to trickle in, which isn't all that engaging. I can kinda see where this system is going, but it's not there yet. The concept of building up several towns at once is fun. When things slow down in one location, you hop over to the next one. There's always something to do, but currently it is not fleshed out enough to make it a selling point. Alright, enough economy and numbers. Let's talk about war. This is a big deal in the game, if you want it to be, that is. It's possible to change the game settings to turn a scenario into a chilled, idyllic building experience. But if you want carnage and blood and guts and fire and steel, well, Manor Lords has plenty of that. I mentioned this in the last video, and I will say it again. I see a lot of you out there comparing this to Total War and calling it a Total War killer. If you're going into this expecting massive armies sweeping across the landscape and troop counts to rival the Battle of Grunwald, well, that isn't what this is. Battles in Manor Lords at their largest are fought between a dozen or so regiments, a couple hundred soldiers tops, which is pretty nuts for a town builder game, I need to add. Most of the time though, it'll be you fending off bandit attacks with a few dozen soldiers, though I would argue that it's more exciting than your typical war game. Let me break it down. So, your standard strategy game. You want troops, you train them. In most cases, they appear into existence when you want them, and if they die, oh, you just train some more. Not here. Apart from your personal retinue, you don't have any dedicated soldiers. Your townspeople, your lumberjacks, blacksmiths, tailors, farmers, they are the ones who will be doing the fighting, and they are the ones who will lay dead in a field in the aftermath. If you throw your army into the meat grinder, your whole town will suffer. Furthermore, weapons, armor, it all has to come from somewhere. You'll have to gear your economy towards producing arms, which draws focus away from the important things, like food, clothing, beer. Having a contingent of soldiers takes a lot of work, and there's a penalty to pay if you lose. The stakes are high, and this makes the concept of war engaging. You aren't fighting tit for tat every few months, mustering and countering. Battles are less frequent, but have a huge impact. Victory means spreading your influence and gaining new regions. Defeat means that all those people you spent years catering to, well, they're now worm food. Remind yourself, overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer. The battles themselves are a lot of fun. You don't have a huge amount of tools at your disposal just yet, but enough to make it feel like the line between a win and a loss is down to your decision making. And I will confess, sometimes the AI outplayed me. They'd send units round in a wide berth, which I ignored, and then they'd attack me unaware on my flank. I went in expecting them to just throw all their men at me at once, which admittedly was my tactic. The computer definitely had a bit more nuance than me. Just to clarify, in case you didn't get this yet, I am not a voice of authority in these sorts of games, as I am a terrible commander. But from my point of view, there was a lot to like in the warfare side. There were a few issues with unit pathing and troops cheering when they should have been murdering, but mostly the combat was excellent. And like the rest of the game, you can really get in close and personal and watch the action unfold. And again, there's these really nice touches. You'll have bannermen in the melee doing everything to keep your flag flying. And there's a somber tone after the skirmish when you see limp, bloodstained banners discarded among seas of corpses. And combat is a big part of the game, but it's not the whole game. To me, the balance as it stands is spot on, but others may be left wanting more. I'd say if combat is your biggest draw to the game, just be sure you know what you're getting into. Now, before I wrap this up and give my final verdict, I wanted to talk about something I am very passionate about: UI and UX. Yeah, I see you there rolling your eyes. Don't you click off this video, either hear me out or skip to the next section. I don't care which. Okay, user interface and user experience is one of the most important things in a strategy game. On the surface, I love the Manor Lords UI. It is clean, thematic, and stylish. The little bits of medieval-inspired art here and there were right at home. There aren't too many screens to go into, and nearly everything was anchored in the game world. You don't have a separate region screen, you just zoom out. This is great. However, the more I played, the more I realized that information was missing. I mentioned before about the difficulty in locating problems in production chains, and this is really where that fits into. There needs to be better ways to display crucial information to the player. Report screens, trade overview panels, production reports, graphs. Now, there is a production tab, and I'm assuming that's going to be some kind of report at some point in time. So I feel like the dev already knows this, but currently this is the game's biggest weak spot. In some cases, you might want to make sweeping changes around your town, reassign families and change up workplaces. This is also a slow and frustrating experience. I'd love to see them implement something like Against the Storm, where you can immediately see jobs that need filling and drag and drop worker icons into buildings to reallocate. There's a really interesting automation of various aspects of the game. Do not change that, it is great. There just needs to be a way to filter the useful information to the player. There is a detailed view with the tab key, and that's a step, but even that I felt to be quite clumsy and not actually telling me what I needed to know. An elegant solution is simple map overlays. Show me areas where peasants are living too far away from their workplaces, roads which are being under or overutilized. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, just the tools already in use repurposed to clarify details. Because currently, it's hard to tell if you're finding a solution for a problem or simply making it worse. The tooltips in the game also need a bit of tweaking. And by tweaking, I mean they need to be nested. Every strategy game needs nested tooltips. Honestly, they are the best. Alright, I am done talking about UI and UX. If you left to go get a cup of coffee, welcome back. Honestly, you didn't miss much. Let's give my verdict. So, I've gone into a bit of detail about my bugbears with the game, and to reiterate, there's balancing issues, overtuned development points, and the user experience side of the game needs some work to make the flow of information more transparent. I like the idea of settling multiple regions in practice, though currently it feels laborious as you're essentially just doing the same thing over and over. So those are my big negatives. And honestly, I can live with them, because the positives are so overwhelming. The visuals are outstanding, everything's so immersive and atmospheric. The towns you build are organic and natural and feel like they're lifted straight out of the history books. The combat, while not being as detailed as a wargame, is just insane for a town builder. It felt as big an evolution as when I played Stronghold for the first time all those years ago. On the performance end, it actually ran really well. I had no crashes or noticeable glitches. I did have some artificing at the start, but that turned out to be an FSR thing, and changing a few settings fixed that. Though I did run into a few stability issues later in the game, so I'd say like 90% smooth sailing performance wise. Still though, check your hardware specs against the game before you play. I cannot give any guarantees on that sort of thing. All in all though, the most impressive thing about the game is the attention to detail. There's so much thought put into these tiny aspects, and it feels rewarding when you notice these minute little details. I'd be singing these praises if this was a small studio or even a AA game. For a solo project though, I am entirely in awe. This is one hell of an achievement, but I am not factoring any of that into my opinion. It is outstanding, full stop, solo developer or otherwise. Now obviously there's a lot of gaps left to be filled in. All of what I've just said is assuming you're okay with an unfinished game. If you want the full experience and you think you'll get annoyed by parts being left out, then it's probably better to wait. But it's a really enjoyable experience. And there's one really important thing to remember. This is the worst the game will ever be. There is so much plan, and you can see a lot of the framework built already. The dev has left a trail of breadcrumbs, hinting at where there will be more added in the future. More development tree options and policies, as well as region-specific specializations which will help tailor towns and make them feel individual and focused. I had gripes with the trade system, but I got the feeling that this is just a baseline model, and ferrying goods between different regions will be a much bigger focus in the future. And then there's the really juicy stuff. Strongholds, castles, sieges, cavalry, maybe even a trebuchet, things the dev has expressed a desire to include. Currently, you play against an off-screen AI, but I believe the plan is to have AI-controlled towns developing in the game world. You'll see their progress, trade with them, forge relationships, and when all that fails, put their towns to the sword. It's already a very impressive game, but the final version is something deeply exciting. Now, I would usually hold a lot of skepticism, especially from a solo dev, but seeing what he's achieved here, I have full faith that the creator can follow through and deliver. I'm not going to jump the gun and say this is the best town builder game ever made, but it's definitely up there. It does have a long way to go, but when it is fully realized, I do believe this is going to be one of the most important games ever in the genre. Just, don't go expecting this to suddenly change your life right away. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but again, early access. I swear that is the last time I will say it. But anyway, that is about all the talking I can do today. Manor Lords. What a game. It's got a long road ahead of it, but even in this state of its infancy, it is hugely impressive. Thank you so much if you stuck around this long. I know I've talked a lot. But if you stuck through it all, good on you. If you want to see more strategy content from yours truly, please like and subscribe. But now it's your turn to talk. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments about Manor Lords, about what you've seen that excites you, and what you expect from the future of the game. And if you want to see more videos about it, let me know, I can see that done. And if you're rooting around down there in that general area, check out the info tab. There's a Patreon link and I'll be throwing an extended gameplay video up on there. And there's a whole bunch of other content to get stuck into. Don't have to commit to anything, just have a gander. Give it a follow if you're feeling particularly brave. One final time, this is Manor Lords, and I love this. It's made by Slavic Magic, aka Grzegorz Dychenia, aka Greg. He's actually some kind of game dev wizard, and I cannot fathom how he created this. This is the most exciting town builder I have played in years, and I hope you try it and have just as much fun as I did. Now go forth, crush your enemies and all that jazz, and I will catch you next time.